The bankruptcy lawyer's voice droned through the sterile conference room, but I wasn't listening to the details. I was watching my family abandon me again. David, my younger brother, sat rigid in his expensive suit, refusing to meet my eyes. Sarah, my former best friend and now David's wife, clutched his arm like a life preserver. My parents flanked them, a united front of disappointment and disgust. All assets will be liquidated to satisfy creditors, the lawyer continued. Miss Chen's personal guarantees on the business loans mean she'll lose everything. My mother's sharp intake of breath cut through the air. Maya, how could you be so reckless? The family name, our reputation. I smiled. They had no idea what was coming. 3 years ago, they'd made this same choice. When my tech startup crashed and burned, taking our family's initial investment with it, they'd cut me loose without hesitation. David had swooped in to claim the family business, while Sarah, who'd been my college roommate and maid of honor, had consoled him straight into her bed. They'd chosen sides, and it wasn't mine. The memory still burned like acid in my veins. I'd called them from my empty apartment, electricity cut off, phone about to be disconnected. Please, I'd whispered into the darkness, just until I get back on my feet. Maya, you made your choices, David had said, his voice cold through the static. Actions have consequences. Maybe this will teach you responsibility. Sarah had taken the phone. We can't enable your bad decisions anymore. You need to learn from this. They'd hung up, left me drowning while they sailed away in the life raft I'd built. But this time was different. This time, I was ready. Don't worry about the family name, I said, my voice steady as granite. You won't be associated with my failures much longer. David finally looked at me, his eyes hard with judgment. Maya, you need help. Professional help. This pattern of self-destruction is over, I finished. You're absolutely right. The confusion flickering across their faces was delicious. They expected tears, begging, the broken woman they'd left behind before. Instead, they got ice-cold certainty. The kind of certainty that came from 3 years of planning, building, and preparing for this exact moment. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, my silent partner. Phoenix Holdings acquisition complete. We now own 51% of Chen Industries' supply chain. I slipped the phone back into my purse. The countdown had begun. Maya, my father's voice carried that familiar note of condescension. I know you're angry, but you need to think practically. This bankruptcy will follow you for years. Your credit, your reputation. My reputation? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. The reputation you destroyed when you told everyone I was unstable? When you leaked my medical records to the press? His face flushed. That had been 3 years ago when I'd sought therapy after the business collapse. Somehow those private sessions had become public knowledge, painting me as mentally fragile, unfit to run a company. That was necessary, Sarah spoke up, her voice syrupy with false concern. You were having a breakdown. We were protecting you. From what? Success? Independence? The chance to rebuild? I stood up, my chair scraping against the polished floor. Or were you protecting yourselves from competition? The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Miss Chen, perhaps we should focus on the immediate proceedings. Of course. I gathered my purse, moving with deliberate calm. I have other meetings today, more important ones. As I reached the door, David called out, Maya, don't do anything stupid. You're already in enough trouble. I turned back, meeting his eyes with a smile that didn't reach mine. Trouble. David, trouble is what happens to people who don't see the storm coming. The door clicked shut behind me. In the elevator, I allowed myself one moment of anticipation. They thought they'd won. They thought Maya Chen was finished, broken, eliminated as a threat to their carefully constructed kingdom. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 6 months later, I sat in my modest downtown apartment, sipping tea from a chipped mug, while watching David pace across my living room like a caged animal. The irony wasn't lost on me. This same apartment he'd once called pathetic was now his sanctuary, the only place he felt safe enough to reveal his desperation. His usual confidence had cracked like ice in spring, revealing the panic underneath. Gone was the swagger, the easy smile that had charmed investors and clients for years. His designer suit hung loose on his frame. Stress had stolen his appetite along with his sleep. The monthly financial reports I'd been tracking through Phoenix Holdings told a clear story. Chen Industries was hemorrhaging money. Every quarter showed deeper losses. Every month brought new crisis. It was beautiful, really, the precision of it, the slow, inevitable collapse. "Maya, I'm going crazy," he said, running his hands through hair that had started going gray at 35. "The suppliers are choking us. Delivery delays, price increases, contract cancellations. It's like they're coordinating against us." I watched him over the rim of my mug, keeping my expression neutral. 3 months ago, I'd orchestrated the cancellation of their largest shipping contract. 2 months ago, I'd bought out their primary steel supplier and doubled their rates. Last month, I'd convinced their biggest client to take their business elsewhere. Each move had been surgical, precise, untraceable back to me. Phoenix Holdings operated through shell companies, offshore accounts, and proxy investors. To the outside world, Chen Industries was simply experiencing an unfortunate run of bad luck. "Strange coincidence," I murmured. "Maya, I need to ask you something," he said, finally stopping in front of my secondhand coffee table. The same table he'd sneered at 3 years ago, calling it furniture for people who've given up. Now he gripped its edge like a lifeline. "Have you noticed anything strange about our suppliers lately?" I sipped my tea, savoring the irony. "Strange how?" "Price increases across the board, contract terminations. Yesterday, Hartwell Industries pulled their entire order, $3 million just gone." His voice cracked slightly. "It's like they're coordinating against us. Dad thinks it's just market fluctuations, but the timing—" Through my computer screen that morning, I'd watched him argue with their largest client about delayed shipments. The conversation had lasted 47 minutes, each minute more desperate than the last. What David didn't know was that Phoenix Holdings had quietly acquired the suppliers one by one over the past year, like a chess player positioning pieces for checkmate. Every price hike had been calculated, every delay orchestrated, every contract cancellation timed for maximum impact. The beauty was in the patience, allowing each move to settle before making the next, creating the illusion of organic market forces rather than deliberate sabotage. "Sounds stressful," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. David's hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. The man who'd once boasted about his golden touch in business now looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his expensive cologne couldn't mask the scent of desperation clinging to him like smoke. "Maya, I was wondering—" He paused, clearly struggling with his pride. "Your old connections in the industry. The people you worked with before. Everything went wrong. Do you think any of them might know something, might be able to help?" The question hung in the air between us. My old connections. The same network he'd poisoned against me 3 years ago, spreading whispers about my instability and poor judgment. The investors who'd fled when the Chen family publicly distanced themselves from my risky ventures. My old connections? I set down my mug with deliberate care. "David, when I lost everything, those connections vanished faster than smoke. Remember? You were there. You helped them disappear." His face flushed deep red. "That was different. You'd made some questionable decisions. And now you're making them too." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside my window, the city hummed with evening traffic. But in my living room, David's breathing sounded unnaturally loud. I could practically hear his thoughts churning, desperation warring with the last vestiges of his pride. "I could help," I said finally, watching his face light up like a man glimpsing salvation. "For the right price." "Anything." The word exploded from him with pathetic eagerness. "Name it. I want back in. Equal partnership. My name restored to the company letterhead." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes with laser focus. "And I want an apology. From all of you. Publicly." The calculation was immediate, visible in his expression, weighing his pride against his desperation. The company was bleeding money faster than they could staunch the wounds. Chen Industries would face bankruptcy within 6 months without intervention. I'd made sure of that. I'll talk to Sarah and the parents, he said finally, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. After he left, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Phoenix Holdings portfolio. 43 supplier companies, 12 shipping contractors, 7 major clients, and 2 competing firms, all now dancing to my choreography. David had no idea he'd just begged his executioner for mercy. The spreadsheet glowed on my screen, rows of numbers that represented years of careful planning. Every acquisition had been strategic. Every move calculated to create maximum pressure without revealing the puppet master pulling the strings. My phone rang 20 minutes later. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by that professionally perfect headshot she used for the company website. The same photo where she stood beside David, both of them smiling with the confident radiance of people who'd never questioned their right to happiness. Maya? Her voice carried the honeyed manipulation I remembered from college, when she'd convince professors to extend deadlines or convince boys to buy her dinner. David told me about your conversation. I think it's wonderful that you want to help. Do you? I kept my tone carefully neutral, though my free hand clenched into a fist. Of course, we've missed you. I've missed you. A pause, perfectly timed for maximum emotional impact. I know things got complicated after your difficulties, but blood is blood, right? Family comes first. Blood is blood. The exact words she'd used when she announced her engagement to David, 6 months after my business collapsed. When she'd explained why she couldn't be my maid of honor anymore, why our decade-long friendship had to take a back seat to her new relationship. Family came first, just not the family that included me. Sarah, let me ask you something, I said, settling back into my couch. The cushions were worn but comfortable, a far cry from the designer furniture that filled their sprawling suburban home. When you started dating David, did you plan it? Plan what? Her voice pitched higher and defensive. Maya, what are you implying? The timing. Moving in on my brother right when I needed support most. Marrying into the family that cut me loose. Taking my place in the company I'd helped build from the ground up. Each word dropped like ice into the silence. Did you plan it? Or was it just convenient? I could hear her breathing change, quick and shallow. Maya, that's not fair. David and I found each other during a difficult time. We supported each other through my downfall. How romantic. I could practically hear her scrambling for higher ground, that familiar mental pivot she'd perfected in college when caught in contradictions. We want to make things right. David's drafting a partnership agreement, equal shares, just like you asked. We'll even do the public apology if that's what it takes. How generous. The sarcasm dripped from my voice like honey from a broken hive. We're family, Maya. We should have stuck together before. We won't make that mistake again. Her voice grew stronger, more confident as she settled into the role of peacemaker. I know we hurt you. I know we made terrible choices, but we can fix this. We can be a family again. The lies came so easily to her. The same talent that had made her valedictorian, student body president, the golden girl everyone loved. She could reshape reality with words, make black seem white, make betrayal look like love. After she hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment, remembering another call 3 years ago, when I'd been served with eviction papers and called her, sobbing, desperate for help. I just need a loan, I'd whispered, just enough for rent. I'll pay you back as soon as... Maya, I can't enable this behavior, she'd said, her voice cool as winter rain. You need to take responsibility for your choices. Maybe losing everything will teach you what success really costs. Success, I laughed, the sound echoing in my small apartment. She was about to learn what success really cost. I dialed Marcus, my fingers steady as steel. How's our timeline looking? I asked when his gravelly voice answered. 3 weeks, maybe 4, he reported. Their cash flow can't sustain current losses much longer. The Hartley contract was their last major revenue stream. Losing, that was the final nail. Perfect. Initiate phase 2. You sure about this? Once we trigger the hostile takeover, there's no walking back. Your family will know exactly who destroyed them. I thought about David's trembling hands, Sarah's desperate manipulation, my parents' cold dismissal 3 years ago when I'd begged them to believe in me one more time. I'm sure. Maya Chen, CEO of Phoenix Holdings, announces acquisition of Chen Industries. I could already see the headlines. The business journals would love the story. Prodigal daughter returns to claim her birthright. They'd paint it as redemption instead of revenge. The poetic justice made my chest tight with satisfaction. Phase 2 was more complex than Phase 1. Where the first 18 months had been about weakening Chen Industries, Phase 2 was about positioning Phoenix Holdings for the kill. I'd need to be ready to absorb their assets, retain their key employees, and restructure their operations, all while maintaining the fiction that this was a business decision, not personal vendetta. Over the next week, I worked 18-hour days, conference calls with lawyers, accountants, and investment bankers, due diligence reports on every aspect of Chen Industries' operations, financial projections showing how the acquisition would benefit shareholders. The irony was perfect. I knew Chen Industries better than anyone. I'd helped design their original business model back when I was the beloved daughter with big dreams and bigger plans. Every weakness in their structure, every inefficiency in their processes, every vulnerability in their supply chain, I'd built half of them myself. 2 weeks later, I stood in the conference room where it all began. But this time, I wasn't the victim. The power dynamic had shifted like tectonic plates, and I was finally on top. David sat across from me, his expensive suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Sarah perched beside him, her usual polish dimmed by stress lines that expensive concealer couldn't hide. My parents flanked them again, but now their disappointment was directed inward. The conference table gleamed between us, its polished surface reflecting the fluorescent lights like a frozen lake. 3 years ago, I'd sat at this same table while they carved up my life. Today, they would watch me carve up theirs. The partnership papers are ready, David said, sliding a thick folder across the polished table. His signature was already there, black ink on cream paper. The man who'd once called me financially irresponsible, now signing over half his empire to save it from collapse. 50-50 split, just like we discussed. Your name goes back on everything. Maya and David Chen, co-CEOs. I opened the folder, scanning the documents with practiced ease. The lawyers had done thorough work. Profit sharing, decision-making authority, even a clause restoring my original stake in the family trust. On paper, it was everything I'd wanted 3 years ago when they'd frozen me out. This is very generous, I said, my voice carefully measured, especially considering Chen Industries' current financial challenges. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with desperate hope. We know we made mistakes, Maya, terrible mistakes, but this is our chance to fix them, to be a real family business again. A real family business. The words tasted like poison on my tongue. When I'd started my tech company, I'd offered them partnership too. Equal stakes, shared profits, a chance to expand the Chen legacy into the digital age. They'd declined, calling my vision too risky and unrealistic. The market projections look promising, my father added, his voice carrying that familiar note of authority. With your expertise and our established client base, we could be profitable again within 6 months. Profitable, they still didn't understand. This wasn't about profit anymore. My father cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Maya, we owe you an apology. We should have supported you before, should have believed in you when the startup failed. We were protective of the family business, but we went too far. Should have, I agreed, my voice soft as silk, but you didn't. We're trying to make it right now, my mother added, her voice tight with strain. The woman who'd raised me to believe family was everything, then shown me how conditional that love really was. Family means everything to us. We lost sight of that for a while, but we won't make that mistake again. I set the papers down and looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Outside the conference room windows, the city sprawled beneath us. Millions of people fighting their own battles, building their own empires, unaware of the small war being waged 40 stories above their heads. Do you know what I learned when you abandoned me? I asked finally. They waited, tension crackling between us like electricity before a storm. Sarah's manicured nails drummed against the table. David's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. My parents exchanged worried glances. I learned that family is what you choose, not what you inherit. That loyalty has to be earned, not assumed. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city, the same view I'd admired as a child when Dad brought me to the office and told me I'd run this company someday. I also learned that trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired. Maya, please. Sarah's voice cracked with desperation, the perfect composure finally slipping. We made mistakes, terrible, inexcusable mistakes. But we can fix this together. We can be stronger than before. I turned back to face them, my expression calm as mountain snow. Actually, you can't. David frowned, confusion flickering across his haggard features. Oh, what do you mean? I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized months ago. Marcus, proceed with the announcement. Maya, what announcement? David's voice rose with panic, the color draining from his face. The announcement that Phoenix Holdings has acquired Chen Industries, that as of 9 o'clock this morning, I own controlling interest in the company you've been running into the ground. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with shock. My mother actually gasped, a sharp intake of breath that seemed to suck the air from the room. David stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. That's impossible, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The suppliers, the clients, the financing, all orchestrated by me. I moved back to the table, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Phoenix Holdings has been buying your vendors and clients for over a year. Every financial setback, every missed deadline, every lost contract, I planned it all. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Sarah swayed in her chair, gripping the table's edge. My father's face went ash gray, suddenly looking every one of his 72 years. You deliberately sabotaged us? He asked, his voice hoarse with disbelief. I returned the favor. I corrected, my voice steady as bedrock. You sabotaged me first. David's hands clenched into fists, rage flickering behind his exhaustion. This is insane. We're offering you everything you wanted. Everything I wanted 3 years ago. I cut him off, my voice sharp as broken glass. When I was broken and desperate and needed my family to believe in me. When Sarah chose my brother over our friendship. When you chose pride over loyalty. When Mom and Dad chose their reputation over their daughter. I walked back to the table, picking up the partnership papers with deliberate care. The documents that represented their last hope, their final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. With slow, deliberate movements, I tore them in half. The sound was devastating in the silent room, crisp, final, irreversible. The pieces fluttered to the conference table like wounded birds, landing among the untouched coffee cups and abandoned notepads. Now you're the ones who are broken and desperate. Now you need me to believe in you. I met each of their stricken gazes in turn. How does it feel? Sarah started crying. Real tears this time, not the calculated manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Black mascara traced dark rivers down her cheeks, destroying the careful makeup that had taken an hour to apply. Maya, we'll do anything, please. We have 3 kids now, the house, the cars. Our entire life is tied to that company. If you destroy us, you destroy them too. You should have thought of that before. The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. 3 years of planning, scheming, building toward this moment, and it was everything I'd imagined. The fear in their eyes, the desperation in their voices, the complete reversal of power, it was perfect. So why did I feel so empty? My mother rose from her chair, her voice shaking with a rage I'd rarely seen from the woman who'd taught me to always remain composed. This is cruel, Maya, vindictive and cruel. We raised you better than this. No, I said quietly, meeting her fury with ice-cold calm. You raised me to believe family was unconditional. That love meant loyalty. That success meant working together instead of stepping on each other. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then you taught me the opposite. Her face crumpled, the mask of maternal authority dissolving into something smaller, more human. Maya, please, I know we failed you. I know we chose wrong, but this isn't you. This isn't the daughter I raised. The daughter you raised died 3 years ago, I replied, when her own mother wouldn't return her phone calls, when her family chose reputation over relationship. You're right, this isn't her. This is who you created when you destroyed her. The truth of it rang through the room like a bell. Sarah's sobs had quieted to hiccups, but her eyes remained fixed on me with something approaching terror. David looked like he'd aged a decade in the past hour, his shoulders slumped in defeat. But it was my father's expression that surprised me most. Not anger or shock, but something closer to recognition. As if he finally understood the woman sitting across from him. You planned this from the beginning, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Even when you were broken, even when you had nothing, you were planning this. Not from the beginning, I corrected, from the end. From the moment you chose to save yourselves instead of your daughter, from the moment you decided I was expendable. David slammed his hand on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. Fine. You want revenge? You have it. We're destroyed. We'll lose everything. Are you happy now? Not yet. The two words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of fear that spread across their faces. They'd expected the revelation to be the climax, the moment of their destruction. They didn't understand that this was just the beginning. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. Phoenix Holdings will be making some staffing changes. You'll all receive termination letters by tomorrow. Severance will be minimal. Standard industry practice for executives who run companies into bankruptcy. Maya, don't do this, my father pleaded, his authoritative voice reduced to a broken whisper. Think about what you're becoming. I looked back at him, the man who'd taught me to shake hands firmly, to negotiate from strength, to never show weakness in business. The man who'd shown me that love was conditional, that family was a luxury that could be revoked when convenience demanded it. I'm becoming someone who doesn't get betrayed twice. The elevator ride down felt eternal, 40 floors of gleaming steel and polished marble, carrying me away from the scene of my triumph and toward what? The rest of my life stretched ahead like an empty highway, and for the first time since I'd started planning this revenge, I didn't know what came next. My reflection in the polished doors showed a woman transformed, not just successful, but untouchable. Designer suit, perfect makeup, the kind of confidence that money and power could buy. But behind my eyes, I saw something that troubled me. I saw them. I saw David's trembling hands and Sarah's terrified tears. I saw my mother's broken expression and my father's defeated shoulders. The people who'd raised me, loved me, betrayed me, and now feared me. 3 months later, the call came as I reviewed quarterly reports in my new corner office. Phoenix Holdings had acquired 2 more companies since the Chen Industries takeover, and our revenue had tripled. I'd been featured on the cover of 3 business magazines, named one of the top 40 under 40 inches by Forbes, and invited to speak at conferences around the world. Sarah's number flashed on my screen as I watched the sunset paint the city gold, the same skyline I'd stared at from my tiny apartment, planning their destruction. Now I owned a piece of it. Maya? Her voice was smaller now, stripped of its former confidence and manipulation. The honey was gone, replaced by raw desperation. Could we meet, please? What for? David's sick. The words came out in a rush, as if she was afraid I'd hang up before she could finish. The stress, the financial pressure. He had a heart attack last week. He's stable now, but the medical bills. Maya, we lost everything. The house, the cars, the kids' college funds. We're staying with my parents in their 1-bedroom apartment. I leaned back in my leather chair, watching the city spread out below my window like a circuit board of light and shadow. I'm sorry to hear that. The neutrality in my voice seemed to break something in her. We need help. I know we don't deserve it. I know we hurt you beyond forgiveness. But the children? They're 8, 6, and 4 years old. They don't understand why Daddy can't work anymore, why we had to leave their school, why we can't afford. They aren't my responsibility. I cut her off. Please. The word came out as a sob. I'll do anything. Beg on my knees if that's what it takes. Crawl on my hands and knees down Main Street. Just help us. Help them. I closed my eyes, remembering another desperate phone call 3 years ago, when I'd called Sarah after losing everything, pleading for a loan to keep my apartment, to buy groceries, to maintain some dignity while I rebuilt my life from the ashes. She'd been cash poor then, having just bought a new BMW. Couldn't risk David's disapproval by lending to his unstable sister. Maya, I can't enable this behavior, she'd said, her voice cool as winter rain. You need to take responsibility for your choices. Maybe losing everything will teach you what success really costs. Sarah, do you remember what you told me when I asked for help? Silence stretched across the line, broken only by the soft sound of her breathing. You said I needed to take responsibility for my choices. That success requires sacrifice, and I hadn't been willing to sacrifice enough. Each word fell like stones into still water. You were right. Maya, I sacrificed everything. My trust, my forgiveness, my capacity for mercy. And look how successful I became. I hung up without waiting for her response. The next day, I received a text from David's number. I'm sorry for everything. I understand now what we did to you. I understand why you did this to us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. 3 years ago, those words might have meant everything to me. Now they felt hollow, too little, and far too late. I deleted the text without responding. Understanding was a luxury I'd been forced to learn without support, fighting for every insight in the darkness of my destroyed life. They could learn it the same way, alone, desperate, with nowhere to turn but inward. 6 months later, I stood at the podium of the annual Business Excellence Awards, accepting recognition as CEO of the Year. The ballroom glittered with success, 500 of the city's most powerful executives applauding my achievements. Phoenix Holdings had become a multi-billion-dollar empire, and I was its undisputed queen. The speech I gave was polished, professional, full of platitudes about innovation and perseverance. I thanked my team, my investors, my mentors. I spoke about the importance of taking calculated risks and learning from failure. The audience ate it up, hanging on every word as if I was dispensing the secrets of the universe. What I didn't tell them was how empty it all felt, how victory tasted like ash when there was no one left to share it with, how building an empire on revenge had left me ruler of a wasteland. In the audience, I spotted familiar faces from my old life. Former colleagues who distanced themselves when my first company failed now smiled and nodded, hoping to catch my attention for networking opportunities. Investors who'd pulled funding during my darkest hour now sent their business cards through intermediaries, eager to back my next venture. But the faces I was looking for weren't there. My family was persona non grata in these circles now, their business failure and public humiliation making them untouchable in the world I'd conquered. After the ceremony, my assistant handed me a congratulations card that had been delivered to the office. The return address made my chest tighten. My parents' house. The same house where I'd spent childhood summers, where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where they'd celebrated my college graduation and my first business plan. Inside, my mother's careful handwriting, "We saw you on the news tonight. You looked beautiful, successful, everything we always knew you could become. We're proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you'd succeed, even when we couldn't see past our own fears and mistakes. We hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us someday. We love you. Love, Mom and Dad." I folded the card and tucked it into my purse, then drove through the empty city streets to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried. She'd been the one constant in my chaotic childhood, the woman who'd raised me when my parents worked 60-hour weeks building the family business. She'd taught me that real strength meant standing alone when everyone else fell away. "I did it, Nai," I whispered to her headstone, the words carried away by the autumn wind. I became untouchable. I became everything they said I couldn't be. The wind rustled through the oak trees, carrying the scent of rain and dying leaves. For the first time in 4 years, I felt something other than anger or satisfaction, or the cold pleasure of victory. I felt empty, completely, devastatingly empty. That night, I sat in my penthouse apartment, surrounded by the trappings of success, but feeling more isolated than I had in my tiny downtown flat. My empire was complete, my revenge absolute. David worked as a sales clerk at an electronics store now, his health too fragile for the stress of executive decisions. Sarah cleaned houses to pay their rent, her hands raw from chemicals and her pride in tatters. My parents had sold their retirement home to cover debts, moving into a modest apartment in a part of town they'd once looked down on. I'd won everything and lost what mattered most: the possibility of genuine connection, of love that wasn't conditional on success or failure. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hartley Industries is considering a merger proposal. Could be worth $3 billion. Should I schedule a meeting? I stared at the message for a long time. More acquisitions, more power, more money. The machine I'd built to destroy my family had become a prison of my own making, trapping me in an endless cycle of conquest without meaning. Instead of responding to Marcus, I opened my laptop and began typing an email that would change everything. To the Chen Family Foundation Board of Directors, I am pleased to announce the establishment of a $50 million endowment for financial literacy and small business development, with a particular focus on supporting entrepreneurs who have experienced failure and are seeking second chances. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was something else. A bridge between the woman I'd become and the woman I might still choose to be. A way to honor the idealistic dreamer who'd believed families stuck together, while acknowledging the harder truths I'd learned about conditional love and strategic loyalty. Outside my window, the city sparkled with possibility. Millions of lights representing millions of dreams, some being born, some dying, some being reborn from ashes. I'd proven I could build an empire from nothing, could turn betrayal into power, could make my enemies pay for their cruelty. The question now was whether I could build something that lasted beyond revenge. My reflection in the darkened window showed a successful woman, but not a happy one. Power without purpose was just another kind of poverty. I'd made them poor in money, but I'd made myself poor in spirit, poor in connection, poor in the things that actually mattered. Tomorrow, I would decide what kind of empire I really wanted to rule. The phone rang again, Marcus, persistent as always. This time I answered. Maya, the Hartley meeting? Cancel it, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I have other plans. For the first time in 4 years, those plans didn't involve destroying someone else's life. They involved rebuilding my own. Over the following months, I threw myself into the foundation work with the same intensity I'd once brought to revenge. But instead of tearing down, I was building up. Instead of crushing dreams, I was funding them. Instead of exploiting weakness, I was strengthening the vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was doing for strangers what my family had refused to do for me. Giving second chances. Believing in people when they were at their lowest. Providing support without conditions or judgment. My therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, called it transformative healing through service. I called it the only way forward that didn't lead to a dead end. The Foundation's first annual report was a testament to what grace could accomplish. 63 small businesses funded with a success rate of 87%. 49 entrepreneurs who'd declared bankruptcy given new opportunities. Hundreds of families lifted out of poverty through financial education and microloans. But the most important transformation was the one happening inside me. The rage that had sustained me for so long was slowly burning out, replaced by something warmer, more sustainable. Purpose instead of poison. Creation instead of destruction. One evening, as I reviewed applications for the next funding cycle, I found myself looking at a proposal that made my breath catch. Chen and Associates, a small consulting firm specializing in business restructuring for family companies in crisis. The application was professionally written, thoroughly researched, and brutally honest about the founder's past failures. It outlined a business model based on hard-won experience, a team with complementary skills, and a mission statement that emphasized integrity, transparency, and earned trust. It was signed by David Chen and Sarah Chen. I stared at their names for a long time, remembering the people they'd been, the people they'd become, and possibly the people they were trying to be. The application made no mention of our relationship, no appeal to family loyalty. It was purely business, professional, measured, and realistic about both opportunities and challenges. They were asking for help, but not begging, proposing partnership, but not presuming forgiveness. They'd learned something in the years since their downfall, something about humility and hard work and earning what you wanted instead of expecting it as your due. I approved the loan, not because they were family. They'd forfeited that claim years ago. Not because I forgave them. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple absolution, but because the business plan was sound. The market need was real, and everyone deserved a chance to rebuild from their mistakes. The funding letter I sent was strictly professional, signed by the foundation's board rather than by me personally. It included standard terms, regular reporting requirements, and clear consequences for failure to meet obligations. There was no emotion in it, no acknowledgement of our shared history. But there was something else, something that took me weeks to identify. There was hope. Hope that people could change. Hope that cycles of destruction could be broken. Hope that empires built on revenge could transform into something more meaningful. 3 years later, I stood in a different conference room, surrounded by a different kind of family. The Phoenix Holdings leadership team had become my chosen family. Brilliant, loyal people who'd earned their positions through merit rather than genetics. Marcus, my first partner, now served as chief financial officer. Dr. Rodriguez had joined as head of organizational development. The foundation staff had grown to include former recipients who'd become advocates and advisors. We were celebrating another milestone. Phoenix Holdings had been named one of the best places to work for the third consecutive year. Our employee satisfaction scores were off the charts, our turnover rate was near zero, and our profit-sharing program had made millionaires of dozens of team members. But more importantly, we'd found purpose beyond profit. The foundation had grown into a global operation, helping thousands of entrepreneurs rebuild their lives and their dreams. We'd changed the conversation around business failure, making it less about shame and more about learning, growth, and resilience. Maya, Marcus said, raising his champagne glass in a toast, to building something that lasts. To building something that matters, I corrected, clinking my glass against his. As the celebration continued around me, I stepped out onto the terrace that overlooked the city. The same skyline I'd contemplated during my darkest hours, but now it looked different. Less like a battlefield, more like a canvas of possibility. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is David. I know I have no right to contact you directly, but I wanted you to know, Chen and Associates just signed our biggest client yet. A Fortune 500 company that needs help rebuilding after a major scandal. We never could have gotten this far without the foundation's support. Thank you. Not for the money, but for believing we could change. Double quote. I read the message twice, then looked out at the city lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere out there, my brother and former best friend were building something new from the wreckage of their old lives. They were learning what I'd learned, that success without purpose was hollow, that family meant more than blood, that second chances had to be earned. I didn't reply to the text. Some conversations were better left unfinished, some bridges better left unbuilt, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I saved it as a reminder of how far we'd all come. The empire I'd built on revenge had become something unprecedented, a force for restoration instead of destruction. I'd started by tearing down the people who hurt me, but I'd ended by lifting up people who reminded me of who I used to be, broken, desperate, but still fighting. 5 years later, I stood in the same bankruptcy lawyers' conference room where this story began, but everything had changed. The mahogany table that had once been a battlefield now served as a bridge. Across from me sat David, healthier now, though his hair had gone prematurely gray. Sarah looked older but more genuine than I remembered, stripped of the manipulation that had once defined her. My parents flanked them, uncertainty and hope warring in their weathered faces. Between us lay a new proposal, not for revenge or reconciliation, but for something unprecedented, a fresh start. The Chen Family Foundation has approved funding for your expansion proposal, I said, sliding the paperwork across the familiar table. Oh, it's a loan, not a gift. Market rate interest, standard terms, 5-year repayment schedule. David's eyes widened, his voice carefully controlled. Maya, I don't understand. After everything we've done, Everything that happened between us, after everything, you're still my brother, I said simply, the words feeling both foreign and familiar on my tongue. And I'm tired of carrying hatred like a trophy. Sarah leaned forward, her voice tentative but hopeful. What are the conditions? No family involvement in my businesses, no expectation of renewed relationships, no assumption that money erases the past. I met each of their eyes in turn, letting them see the steel beneath my apparent generosity. But also no more punishment for choices you can't undo. My father cleared his throat, his voice rough with emotion. And if we succeed? If the business grows, then you succeed. Your accomplishments will be your own, just like your failures. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. That's how it should have been from the beginning. As I walked toward the door, David called out, Maya, thank you. I turned back one last time, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the villains of my story, but as flawed people trying to rebuild their lives from the consequences of their choices. Don't thank me, I said. Prove me right. Outside the building, the afternoon sun felt warm on my face. I'd built an empire on revenge and found it hollow. Now I was building something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of moving forward without the weight of the past dragging behind me like chains. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Rodriguez. How did it go? I typed back, like letting go of something I didn't realize I was still holding. Phoenix Holdings continued to thrive, but now it served a different purpose. Not as a weapon against my family, but as a foundation for other people's second chances. The empire I'd built in darkness was finally being used to create light, to prove that success could be measured in more than just revenue and revenge. The foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams, operating in 12 countries and changing thousands of lives. We'd revolutionized how society viewed business failure, turning it from a source of shame into a stepping stone for growth. The Chen model, our approach to post-failure rehabilitation and sustainable rebuilding, was being taught in business schools around the world. And for the first time since that first bankruptcy hearing, I wasn't just surviving or succeeding. I was living, creating, building something that would outlast my anger, outlive my ambition, and outshine the temporary satisfaction of revenge. The girl who'd been abandoned by her family was gone. The woman who'd destroyed them in return was evolving. And the person I was becoming, CEO, philanthropist, force for positive change, was someone I could finally respect. Standing on the sidewalk where my old life had ended and my new one had begun, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 7 years. Peace. Not the cold satisfaction of victory, but the warm contentment of purpose fulfilled. I'd learned to build empires. Now I'd learned to build something more important. A life worth living, regardless of who chose to be part of it. The city hummed around me, full of other people's dreams and struggles and second chances. Somewhere in that urban symphony, my family was rebuilding their lives without my help or hindrance. Somewhere else, foundation recipients were taking risks, chasing dreams, proving that failure wasn't final. And here in the middle of it all stood Maya Chen. Not untouchable, but unbroken. Not perfect, but progressing. Not defined by what had been done to her, but by what she chose to do next. The empire was complete. The story was just beginning.